To my listeners, thank you for coming back. This one's not about betrayal, not the way the last one was. This is about the quiet kind. The kind we do to ourselves. You know what I'm talking about. When you look in the mirror and realize you've been slowly fading, smiling for others, performing roles, but somewhere along the way, you forgot who you are. This story starts 3 months after Elena left my house, and left a storm in my heart. It was a Thursday. Late September, just cool enough to carry a hint of fall in the air. I had just finished wiping down the kitchen counters, again. For the 3rd time. Not because they needed it, but because I needed something to do with my hands. Mark and I were civil. We talked more now. He tried. I tried. But the space between us wasn't just about trust anymore. It was about identity. I'd spent so long being his wife, the caretaker, the fixer. But after everything that happened, I started asking myself questions I didn't like. Who am I when no one needs me? What do I want, just for me? That's when I saw the flyer. It was stuck on the community bulletin board at the corner coffee shop. Evening art classes, beginners welcome. Taught by a local artist named Daniel Whitmore. Tuesdays and Thursdays. $75 for 4 sessions. I don't know what made me do it. I hadn't picked up a paintbrush since college. But something about that flyer felt like an open door. And for once, I wanted to walk through it alone. The first class was small. 7 of us total. A mix of ages. 2 retirees. A single mom named Lauren who talked fast and laughed louder. And him, Daniel. Tall. Maybe mid to late 40s. Graying at the temples. Wore old jeans, a soft linen shirt, and the kind of expression that made you feel like he saw more than you were saying. His hands were stained with dried paint. His eyes were this quiet shade of storm cloud blue. He welcomed us gently, like we weren't students but stories waiting to be told. Painting, he said, isn't about getting it right. It's about getting it out. Then he passed out canvases and cheap acrylics and said, paint whatever's been living in your chest lately. Don't think. Just feel. I froze. The others jumped in, colors splashing, brushes moving. But I stared at the blank canvas like it was judging me. Then, slowly, I dipped my brush in blue. And I started. I painted a woman. Not me. But not a stranger either. She was standing in the rain, face tilted up like she was trying to remember how to feel. Her hands were open. Her mouth was closed. The colors ran. The lines blurred. But it felt honest. When class ended, I was the last one packing up. Daniel walked over, glanced at my canvas. He didn't compliment it. He just asked, "What made you stop painting?" I smiled politely. Life. He nodded like he understood. That'll do it. Then, before I could leave, he said something that stuck with me. Don't wait until you're drowning to remember you can swim. At home, Mark noticed the paint on my hands. He raised a brow. New hobby? I told him about the class. About the instructor. About how it felt to make something again. He nodded, distracted, reading emails. But later that night, he said something I didn't expect. I like seeing you lit up again. And I realized then, he saw the light. But he had no idea what it cost me to keep it burning. Class 2. We worked with light and shadow. Daniel showed us how to find contrast. What makes something stand out isn't the light itself, he said. It's the darkness around it. I thought about that for days. Thought about how much I'd tried to stay in the light for others, smiling, hosting, loving, while my own shadows went unpainted. Lauren, my new classmate friend, sat beside me. She was 32, wild curls, 2 kids, no partner. We got along fast. That night, she looked at my canvas and said, "Girl, you're not painting pictures. You're painting truth." We laughed over cheap wine in the parking lot afterward, both of us sitting on the hoods of our cars like teenagers. Ever thought about leaving? She asked. I didn't ask what she meant. We both knew. Yeah, I said. But I think I'd miss who I used to be more than who I left behind. She nodded like she got it. That's the trick, huh? Trying to find her again. Daniel started noticing my work. Not in a flirty way, at least, not exactly. But in the way a man sees a woman as a person, not just a title. One evening, he stood behind me for a long while. You paint grief like someone who's known it. I didn't answer. Didn't need to. He said, there's something beautiful in the way you leave space in your work. Not everything needs to be filled. I didn't realize until later how badly I needed to hear that. At home, things got weird. Mark started asking questions. Is it all women in the class? What's this Daniel like? Do you two talk much? Jealousy didn't suit him. He wore it awkwardly, like a suit 2 sizes too small. But I told him the truth. Daniel wasn't a threat. He was a mirror. And when you're finally seeing yourself clearly, sometimes the people around you get scared. The turning point came on a Tuesday. Daniel asked us to paint self-portraits. Not our faces, ourselves. The parts we don't let the world see. The room went quiet. Everyone got serious. I painted a woman underwater. Eyes open. Hair floating like seaweed. And in her chest, something glowing. Small. But bright. When I finished, Daniel looked at it. He didn't speak for a long time. Then he said, you ever think that the reason you're still breathing down there is because you haven't decided to come up yet? That night, I went home and cried in the shower for 45 minutes. Not because I was sad, but because I was waking up. They call it the blue hour, that time just after sunset, when the light hasn't fully disappeared, but the dark is already stretching across the sky. It's soft, beautiful, but full of uncertainty. That's exactly what the next part of my life felt like. Somewhere between goodbye and beginning. It started with a text. From Daniel. No, not that kind of text. It wasn't flirty. It wasn't crossing a line. It just said, Hey Claire, your canvas from last week is still at the studio. Wanted to check if you needed it for anything. I did forget it. I was rushing that night, Mark had called while I was cleaning up, and I left without double-checking. Still, my stomach did that little flutter when I saw his name pop up. Not butterflies. Not desire. More like recognition. Like someone saying, I see you. I told Mark I'd be late. That I left something at the studio. He nodded, didn't look up from his laptop. Okay. Want me to order Thai for dinner? I said sure. He didn't ask any other questions. But I could feel his eyes on me as I grabbed my keys. That quiet suspicion that had started to settle between us like dust. Daniel was alone when I got to the studio. The lights were low. Jazz playing softly in the background. My canvas was leaning against the wall, right where I left it, my underwater woman with the glowing chest. She's powerful, he said, motioning to the painting. You ever think about showing your work? I laughed. At a high school art fair in 2003. That was my peak. He smiled. Well, I think she's got more to say. We stood there, side by side, looking at the piece. And that's when he said it. Are you happy? Not are you okay? Not how are you? But are you happy? I couldn't answer. Not right away. I opened my mouth and closed it again. Finally, I said, I think I'm figuring out what that even means. And he nodded. Like he'd been there, too. Let's pause here. Because I know what you're wondering. Did I want him? Was I tempted? The honest answer? Yes. But not for the reasons you might think. I didn't want his body. I wanted his clarity. His freedom. His presence. I wanted to know what it felt like to be around someone who saw me without a role attached. Not a wife. Not a hostess. Not someone's partner. Just Claire. We sat on the floor that night. In silence. He showed me how to mix skin tones using unexpected colors, burnt sienna, cadmium yellow, even a touch of blue. There's no formula, he said. Just feeling. Just trust. And I thought, isn't that everything? Love. Art. Healing. It's not math. It's instinct. And I'd stopped trusting mine a long time ago. At home that night, things broke. Mark was waiting. He didn't yell. Didn't accuse. He just asked, "Are you falling for him?" And I said the only thing I could. I don't know. Because it wasn't love. But it was something. Something awakening. Something dangerous. Something mine. We sat at the kitchen table. The same place I confronted him months ago. This time, it was my turn. I told him everything. Not about Daniel exactly, but about me. How I felt unseen. How I'd been performing for years. How I was tired of living on autopilot. And he just listened. His face fell. And he whispered, "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I cried then. Not because I was guilty. But because I was grieving. For the woman who waited too long to speak. Lauren and I had coffee the next morning. She listened without judgment. That's what good women do. "Girl," she said, stirring her drink. "Wanting to feel alive isn't a sin. It's survival." I asked her if she ever missed her ex. She said, "No. I miss the woman I thought I could be when I was with him." That one hit me deep. Back in art class, Daniel was distant. Not rude. Just careful. He could feel the shift. I had pulled back. Set boundaries. Because I realized something. It wasn't about choosing between Daniel and Mark. It was about choosing me. Choosing to stop shrinking. Choosing to be uncomfortable. Choosing to grow, even when it terrified me. And here's what I know now. You can be faithful in action and still stray in spirit. You can love someone deeply and still feel like you're losing yourself. And sometimes, the most honest thing you can do is admit you're not okay. That week, I painted again. But this time, not a woman underwater. This time, I painted her climbing out. Hands gripping the edge. Face turned toward the light. Hair soaking wet, but eyes wide open. Now, let me tell you what happened when the silence finally broke. There's a kind of quiet that doesn't feel peaceful. It's the kind that feels like a hallway after someone slams the door. The kind that echoes with things unsaid. That was my house for weeks after I told Mark the truth. We didn't fight. We didn't touch. We lived in a kind of limbo, coexisting, cooking, cleaning, sleeping on the same mattress but oceans apart. It wasn't Daniel's fault. It wasn't even Elena's anymore. This was deeper. This was ours. The part of our marriage that never had language. One night, I was folding laundry. White t-shirts. His. Soft from years of wear. Smelled like cedarwood and soap. And I suddenly thought, how many pieces of my life have been wrapped in his skin? His routines. His schedule. His needs. I stopped mid-fold, sat down on the bed, and stared at the carpet like it had answers. Then I heard him say, from the doorway, "You're slipping away from me." My heart jumped. Because for once, he said it. No blame. No defense. Just truth. I looked up and said, "I think I've been gone for a while. I just didn't know how to admit it." That night we talked. Really talked. Two adults. No masks. No pretending. I told him about the ache. About how I'd slowly disappeared trying to hold everything together. He told me about the fear. How after my miscarriage, he didn't know how to comfort me. How watching me close up made him feel like a stranger in his own home. He said, I didn't cheat with Elena. But I almost did. And that's something I carry with shame every day. And I said, I didn't fall in love with Daniel. But a part of me wanted to, because I thought he saw something in me that I'd forgotten was there. Then we just sat there. Two broken people, finally honest. And that honesty? It cracked something open. The next week, I skipped art class. I needed space. Daniel texted to check in. I told him the truth, that I was focusing on my marriage. He replied, "Good. Art will always be here. Your healing comes first." That was it. No drama. No guilt. Just respect. And I felt peace. Real, deep peace. Because I knew then. What I needed wasn't him. What I needed was to stop waiting for someone else to give me permission to want more. Lauren and I met for lunch. She looked at me like she already knew. "You look different," she said. "Lighter." I laughed. I've been crying more. Sleeping less. Arguing more. And somehow, I feel better. She smiled. "That's growth, honey. Real growth hurts before it heals." Then she leaned in and said something I'll never forget. "So, what do you want now, Claire?" When no one else is watching. I didn't answer. Not right away. But later that night, I did. I took out a blank canvas. No plan. No reference. Just color. I painted with rage. With softness. With joy. With memory. I painted my entire self. The girl who was afraid. The woman who carried others. The wife who loved deeply. The soul who wanted to breathe again. And when I stepped back, I didn't cry. I smiled. Because I saw her. Me. Not as someone something. Not as half of a couple. Just Claire. So here's the truth that was never said. I want a life that feels honest. Messy. Whole. Fully mine. I want late night music, soft laughter, deep friendship, and days where I feel more alive than responsible. I want love. Not perfect love. But honest love. And I want to keep choosing myself, again and again, without guilt. Mark and I are still here. Still figuring it out. We're not magically healed. But we're real now. We don't pretend anymore. We ask hard questions. We fight better. We listen harder. And sometimes, we still sleep back to back. But in the morning, we face the same sunrise. And for now, that's enough. Chapter 3 ends here. But this version of me? She's just beginning. To everyone listening, if you've ever put yourself on hold for someone else, if you've ever felt like a ghost in your own life, I hope this story reminded you that it's not too late. You're not too much. You're not too broken. You're just becoming. And becoming is damn beautiful. We had this little guest room, barely used, mostly filled with boxes and old college furniture. One morning, I opened the window in there for the first time in maybe a year. The sun poured in like warm honey. Dust danced in the air. And I felt it. That whisper. That quiet, pulsing voice inside that said, "This is your space now." I cleared it out in a day. Carried old boxes to the garage. Hauled in a thrifted bookshelf. Set up an easel in the corner, placed my canvases along the wall. Nothing fancy. Just mine. I hung fairy lights. Lit a candle that smelled like bergamot and pine. Played old soul records on a dusty speaker I found in Mark's office. And I sat on the floor, cross-legged, like I was 19 again and the whole world was still unfolding. That room became my sanctuary. No one else's. Mark knocked on the door once, a week later. He peeked in and said, "I like what you've done in here." I nodded, said, "Thanks." Then he asked, carefully, "Can I come in?" That was new. He was learning. He was asking for space, not taking it. And when he sat down beside me, we didn't talk about anything heavy. We just listened to music, side by side, like we used to. Things weren't perfect. Some nights we still barely spoke. Some mornings I woke up wondering if I'd stayed out of fear or faith. But slowly, I realized I wasn't staying for him anymore. I was staying because this version of me, this healing, honest, unfinished woman, deserved a chance to live her life fully. And whether or not our marriage lasted, I would never abandon her again. I started painting joy. Not forced joy. But earned joy. A little girl chasing fireflies. A pair of wrinkled hands clasped in prayer. A woman dancing in a rainstorm, eyes closed, mouth wide open in laughter. They weren't me, and they were all me. Each one held a piece of the light I'd found inside myself. One Sunday, I hosted a little art night at home. Nothing big. Just a few women I'd met through Lauren, some old friends, a few new ones. We drank wine. Ate finger foods. Sat barefoot on the rug with brushes in our hands and heartache in our stories. We painted in silence and in conversation. One woman cried over a canvas of red and gold. Another laughed so hard she knocked over her cup of water. And I felt full. Not from the wine. But from the company of women who weren't afraid to be soft and loud and brave all at once. That night, when they left, I stood in my studio, my space, and whispered, "This is the life I prayed for," before I even had the words. Daniel and I never spoke again. Not because of drama. Because closure doesn't always come through conversation. Sometimes it's just a soft moment where you realize he was a bridge. Not a destination. And that's okay. He saw me when I needed to be seen. He reminded me that I still had color left inside me. But the masterpiece? That was always mine to paint. Mark and I are okay. Better than we were. Still growing. Still working. We go on evening walks now. We talk more slowly. We laugh more freely. We even argue better, not to win, but to understand. And most nights, we fall asleep with our hands touching. Not gripping. Not holding. Just touching. Like a promise. Soft. Real. Quiet. So what did I learn? I learned that healing isn't loud. It's not fireworks or fresh starts. Sometimes it's lighting a candle and sitting with your own thoughts. Sometimes it's saying no without explaining. Sometimes it's choosing yourself without apology. And sometimes it's realizing that love, real, beautiful, sustaining love, doesn't always arrive with a grand entrance. Sometimes it's already there, waiting for you to see it. Just like you. This is the end of this story, but not the end of mine. I'm still painting. Still praying. Still showing up for myself. And I hope, if nothing else, you know this. You are allowed to be the main character in your life. Even if you forgot how to be. Even if you've only ever been the supporting role. You are worth it. Every messy, brave, beautiful part. Thank you for listening. For walking with me. For letting me be honest, even when it was uncomfortable. If my story lit something in you, let me know. Share it. Talk to someone. Or just start by talking to yourself, gently, like a friend.